Half of that penthouse is ours. My sister hissed across the conference table. The black folder open like a trap. You were just a placeholder, child. I kept my palm on the sealed envelope. The red notary stamp stared back at me like a stubborn eye. It was the afternoon after my grandmother's funeral. Manhattan was gray and damp. The kind of weather that settles into your collar and makes you feel older than you are. The lawyer's office smelled of paper and polished wood. A brass lamp threw a lonely circle of light over the will. A copy of the trust. And a neat stack of certified death certificates. I counted them without meaning to. 5. People who have been excluded from affection learn to count. My family arrived in a blur of umbrellas and perfume. My mother adjusted her pearls as if grief were a neckline. My father sat, already frowning at the billable minutes. My sister angled her phone to capture a tasteful photo of our grief. I stood. I said my name. I said I was the granddaughter. The one who lived here. No one responded. They were too busy choosing chairs. I live alone. My home is quiet. There is a bowl by the door for keys no one else uses. The city speaks in sirens and steam. I sleep through both. I run an investment fund that buys art when artists still need rent. I learned to trust patience and paper. If you ask about my childhood, I have a shoebox answer a few photos. A few report cards. A pressed program from the school concert I sang in when no one came. Some things sharpen with time, some things blur. At the wake, people clinked glasses and wrapped my hands in theirs. She adored you, they said. Meaning my grandmother. You were her reason. They did not look at my mother. They did not look at my father. They looked just past my shoulder. As if the air there might be safer. I poured coffee for my sister, and she drank it without thanks. Then posted a filtered portrait of her eyelashes and captioned it with a Bible verse she did not know. I carried the urn papers in a stiff manila envelope. When the room emptied, no one asked if I needed a ride home. Here is the conflict. As cleanly as I can frame it, a home high over the river, and a family that cannot climb a staircase without demanding a key at the top. Here is the promise: there is more to this than a deed and a view. Give me a moment. Some parts require careful light. Tell me where you are watching from and hit subscribe. Families and money do not mix well. And we are about to stir. The lawyer cleared his throat. He is a small man with a large respect for commas. Per the trust instrument, he began. We will proceed in order. My father waved this away with a tired hand. My mother smiled the way someone smiles at a waiter. My sister leaned forward. Elbows on walnut. Lip gloss shining like a threat. I pressed my fingers to the envelope and felt the grit of the embossed seal. The paper was heavy. My grandmother liked things that lasted. She once told me good documents have weight. The way a promise has weight, otherwise they blow off the table when someone opens a window. She did not have many windows open in her life. Not after my parents decided that a different daughter looked better in photographs. Let's not pretend, my sister said, with a bright social voice. Grandma meant for the family to use everything together. It's not healthy for one person to hoard space. She glanced at my phone. Then at the door. She had likely texted someone to be ready with flowers if we posted a victory picture. She is efficient in matters of perception. Please, I said to the lawyer. Because I was raised by a woman who ironed her manners. Read. He read. He read dates. He read clauses. He read a paragraph that used my full name. In the reflection of the lamp, I saw my mother's mouth harden to a line. The trust named me primary beneficiary. The apartment was described by its legal description. A string of numbers like a spine. The art fund received a percentage. A scholarship program got the rest. It was simple. My grandmother favored direct doors. My father laughed. It sounded like a bark catching in his throat. This can be undone, he said. Guardianship. You were a minor when she started this nonsense. We stood as your parents, we were the decision makers. A court will see that. He patted the folder my sister had brought. A slick one with a gold clip. We have documents. My sister added. Sweet as syrup poured too fast. Be reasonable. Eve. We will form a family company. You will be a member like everyone else. Sign a power of attorney so Dad can manage the filings. It will be cleaner for taxes. You love being clean. Don't you? She looked straight at me. There it was. The old habit. The order hidden inside the question. Sign. I thought about a kitchen years ago where my name was a chore. I thought about birthdays that passed like buses. If you missed them, you missed them. Naughty funds. I thought about the night I moved my suitcase into my grandmother's guest room. How she replaced the bare bulb with a lamp and said, "There? Now the light is kind." People talk about resilience like it is a ribbon you win. It is not. It is the habit of not breaking. I said nothing. I set the envelope on the table and slid it toward the lamp. The red notary seal winked in the circle of light. My sister's eyes followed the seal as if it were a coin. "You cannot just take it," she whispered. And the whisper did more damage than the shout. "You are nothing without this address. This isn't your house. You're just staying here on pity," my mother said. Finally letting the mask slip. It fell and cracked. You could hear it. Sometimes you can feel the city pause around you. Like a crowd pausing at a crosswalk when the light says to wait. That hush came into the room. The lawyer fumbled a paper. My father sat back. The radiator coughed once. As if to pull focus. I took a breath that felt older than I am. There are distant relatives who appear only when paper appears. One of them shuffled in late and took a chair along the wall. He wore a coat that smelled of rain. He smiled at the air. My sister glared as if he had stolen her seat. The room was full of small wars. The lawyer read more. He read the words, "No contest." He read a line about prior gifts given with love and no requirement of equalization. He read the clause that said removal and addition of trustees was at my discretion. My father pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of his nose. My mother opened a compact and shut it again without using it. My sister checked her phone. Then turned it face down. A tiny act of surrender. "This is not over," my father said. "He has always loved a door he can slam. There are other documents. You do not understand what was signed when you were young." "Maybe," I said. "Maybe I do." I lifted the envelope and slid it back into my bag. The zipper's sound was small and good. "We will all have our turn." They tried another angle. "Family first," my sister said, twisting the band on her finger as if it stuck. "We are stronger together. Think about what people will say if you turn your back. There is always a public to be managed. There is always a chorus somewhere practicing what to sing." I looked at the framed diplomas on the wall. The lawyer's degree sat level. Mine, in my office across town, is a hair off center. I have always liked that. It reminds me, perfection can be cruel. "I will think," I said. To the room and to the memory of my grandmother's voice. But not here. When I stepped outside, the sky had the color of old pewter. A taxi hissed by. Its tires painted a pale line on wet asphalt. I tucked the envelope deeper into my bag and felt the shape of it against my hip. Paper can be a shield. Paper can be a blade. The trick is knowing when not to swing. I walked east, toward the river and the place where buildings float in their own reflections. My phone buzzed with a message from my sister I did not open. Pigeons made a low circle over a deli awning, regrouping the way families do when the food is gone. I thought about dinner. I thought about what they did not know. What they did not know was this: some recordings do not live in envelopes. Some promises carry their own light. And some homes are not houses at all. They are people who kept you warm when the heat went out. If you are still with me, stay. The next part matters. It is where words become deeds. I never forgot the way my sister sneered at me that night. "You don't belong here. Sleep in your car if you have to." Her words still echoed whenever I touched the brass keys to my own lake house. That house had cost me years of savings and late-night coding sessions. Yet she and my parents acted as if it was theirs by default. I worked for a large tech company in Chicago, climbing through endless lines of code while eating cheap noodles just to pay student loans. Every dollar I saved had gone into one dream: a quiet retreat by the water. When I signed the deed, the notary's stamp left a dark blue mark that felt like a seal of freedom. I thought it would be a place of peace. Instead, it became the battlefield for my family's resentment. My parents still lived in the house where I grew up. A modest brick home with peeling shutters. They had steady but modest incomes. Never enough to cover unexpected bills. My younger brother floated between warehouse jobs. Always broke. Always waiting for someone else to rescue him. My sister, the youngest, worked part-time retail. But her true full-time job was demanding sympathy. At first, I tried to help. A rent payment here. A repair bill there. $400 to keep the lights on. $800 to stop an eviction notice. $200 slipped into an envelope during Sunday dinner. I told myself I was doing what any good daughter would do. But slowly, the help became an expectation. My name was no longer just my name, it was a bank account they felt entitled to. One evening, I arrived at my parents' house with a simple gift bag, a set of wine glasses I'd bought on sale for $45. My sister's eyes narrowed. Must be nice. Throwing money around. She muttered. My brother joined in, shaking his head. Meanwhile, I'm stuck eating beans every night. They both ignored the fact that I had paid their rents that very month. The silence from my father cut deeper than their words. He would nod along, as if their complaints had merit, while my mother tried to soften the edges with lines like, "They just wish they had your opportunities." No one mentioned the nights I had worked until dawn or the years I went without vacations. They preferred the story where I was simply lucky. That summer, when I finally told them about the lake house, the air in the dining room turned heavy. I described the wide deck, the tall oak trees, the water that caught every shade of evening light. Instead of joy, I was met with suspicion. Another house, my brother scoffed. My sister smirked, fork tapping her plate. Relaxation. Huh, must be nice. My mother cut in with her favorite refrain. You should have discussed this with us first. That money could have fixed the roof here. As though my savings existed for communal use. As though the years of my life belonged to them. Still, I tried to bridge the gap. I invited them to visit. Maybe, I thought, if they saw the house with their own eyes, they would understand it was not an enemy but a gift. The next weekend, I arrived early, unpacked groceries, set my laptop on the wooden desk that overlooked the lake. The morning sun turned the water silver. And for a brief hour, I allowed myself to feel proud. Then I heard tires on gravel. My father's truck appeared, followed by the sight of all of them stepping out. My parents, my brother, my sister. They stood in the yard like conquerors inspecting new land. I offered coffee, tried to be gracious, but their eyes wandered greedily. My sister opened cabinets without asking. My brother walked out to the deck and whistled low. This is worth at least $500,000. Maybe more, he said. He said it the way a thief might weigh jewelry. By evening, they had settled into the rooms as if they were hotel guests. My father found the spare key hidden under a flower pot and slipped it into his pocket without a word. The gesture was small but told me everything. This place was no longer mine alone. The next weekend, I returned after a long work week, craving silence. Instead, I found cars parked in the driveway, laughter spilling from inside. Through the glass door, I saw relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. Plates of food covered the dining table I had bought secondhand. My sister spotted me at the door and smirked. No room for you. Sleep in your car. Her words hit like ice water. I held the brass key in my hand, the very one that proved ownership. Yet I was the outsider. I wanted to scream, to call the police, to demand they leave. Instead, I turned and walked back to my car. I sat there with the engine off, listening to their voices echo through walls I had paid for. I will explain later how that night shifted everything. How their arrogance led to consequences none of them saw coming. But for now, I want to hear from you. Tell me, where are you watching from? And make sure you subscribe because families and money are never a simple mix. And what happened next still makes me shake my head. The Midtown office had no grandeur to distract anyone. Beige walls, a brass lamp, a table polished thin by other people's quarrels. I sat with my bag against my leg, the envelope with my grandmother's seal inside. Across from me, my sister and her husband arranged their papers like stage props. My parents settled behind them, faces set in that old mask of injured dignity. Let's keep this simple, my brother-in-law began, voice too loud for the room. He slid a glossy folder toward the estate lawyer. Guardianship existed when Evelyn was young. Family management is appropriate. We propose a family company to hold everything Penthouse. Accounts. And of course the lake house she has been using. I let that line hang. Of course the lake house. They speak about my life as if furniture appears when they point. I rested a palm on the envelope. The red notary seal stared back like a small, stubborn moon. Counsel. The estate lawyer said mildly. We will address the trust first. He clicked open a small drive and turned the screen toward us. No fanfare. Just a soft whir, and my grandmother's face appeared, blue cardigan, buttoned high. Eyes clear. Voice steady despite the thinness of her breath. This is my final instruction. She said. The penthouse passes entirely to Evelyn. The trust fund is for her stewardship and the scholarship program as written. I revoke all prior powers of attorney, and any guardianship claims over her affairs. No one is to interfere. Silence moved through the room like a tide. It pulled color from my sister's cheeks and left my father's jaw working hard on nothing. My mother touched her pearls. They clicked together like teeth. That video could be fabricated. My brother-in-law tried. Though his confidence had sprung a leak. It is notarized and witnessed. The lawyer replied. Sliding a certificate across the table. Recorded 1 week before her passing, stored with chain of custody. My father leaned forward. Family still decides how property is used. It is unhealthy to let one person hoard space. Unhealthy. I repeated. And felt an old laugh rise and fall inside me, where no one could hear it. You left me to be raised by the woman who made this decision. She is the family that showed up. My sister tapped the table with one lacquered nail. Fine, then fold everything into a company and we manage it together. Sign a power of attorney so Dad can execute. The lake place included. No. I said. And kept my tone even. The lake house is not part of my grandmother's estate. I bought it with my earnings. I signed the closing papers in my name. The deed records and escrow letter reflect that. You have been guests there, uninvited ones at times, but guests all the same. The estate lawyer nodded and opened a thin blue folder. To avoid any confusion. Here is the public deed record for the lake property. Vesting title, solely in Evelyn's name. It is outside this probate matter. My sister's husband stiffened. You could almost hear the hinge. Then we contest the trust. Guardianship gives us standing. The lawyer's mouth tilted. Almost pitying. He set another page on the wood. The instrument contains a no contest clause. Any challenge by interested parties reduces their portions to nothing. Your clients were left prior gifts and discretionary benefits under the scholarship language. If they contest and fail, they receive nothing at all. My mother inhaled. Small and sharp. My father looked away from the paper as if the print might burn him. My sister forced a smile that trembled. We will take our chances. Before you do, I said. You should hear the rest. The lawyer drew out a tabbed packet and fanned it gently. As if airing something that had been shut too long. Bank records from the final year of the decedent's life show irregular withdrawals totaling $260,000. Transfers were initiated through accounts controlled by family members seated here. The decedent disputed those withdrawals in writing. That was for family expenses. My father snapped. We were managing things. She was tired. Not too tired to record a revocation. The lawyer said. Calm as rain. These entries will be referred for review. Elder exploitation is a grave matter. I advise you to obtain separate counsel. My sister's chair scraped. This is character assassination. No. I answered. It is paper. Paper remembers when people try to forget. For a moment, the room held only the hum of the vent and the low tick of the brass desk clock. I thought of my grandmother teaching me how to read a page the way a carpenter reads a board, where the knots live, where the grain runs. How not to split a thing you might still use. My brother-in-law gathered his folder with theatrical care. We will respond in writing. Do. The lawyer said. Until then, the trust stands. The penthouse remains under Evelyn's control, and the lake house is hers outright by purchase. Not inheritance. There is nothing further to negotiate in this meeting. My sister leaned across the table then. The old venom rising now that the audience had thinned. This isn't your home. You're just staying here on pity. I did not rise to meet it. I have learned there is power in staying seated when someone expects you to flinch. Pity is what I grew up without. I said. What she gave me was love. And a roof she asked me to defend. They filed out my father first. always hunting for a door he could slam. My mother behind him, already shaping the story for anyone who would listen. My sister and her husband last, whispering logistics like paramedics over a failed rescue. I stayed. The lamp traced a soft circle over the certificate. The witness lines. The crest of the notary. I slid the video drive back into its sleeve. Then the deed copy for the lake house into my bag beside it. 2 different paths to the same truth, one gift, one earned. Both mine to keep standing. Out in the hall, the building's old radiator coughed, and I heard the elevator cables sing their thin steel song. I thought of the next steps, the hearing, the investigation, the way light works when you lift paper to it. They thought the lake house was part of their harvest. They thought the penthouse was a stage. What they did not understand was simple. I know which walls are inherited and which ones I built with my own hands. I know how to lock both. Courtrooms are colder than offices. Not in temperature though, the air conditioning often bites, but in tone. Here, voix flatten. Emotions shrink to fit inside procedures. Yet beneath that polished restraint, battle roar. When I walked into the county courthouse for the emergency hearing, I could feel my pulse thudding against the marble floor. My sister arrived flanked by her husband, carrying a briefcase too shiny to be trusted. My parents shuffled in behind, rehearsed indignation painted across their faces. My brother tagged along, silent, eyes darting, as if searching for exits. They looked like a troupe preparing for a play. Each with their role, the stern patriarch, the grieving mother, the righteous daughter. I sat alone at the opposite table. My lawyer beside me steady, gray-haired, the kind of man who had seen every shade of family greed. He leaned toward me. Remember, he whispered, we don't need theatrics. We have the truth. The judge entered. We rose. Wood creaked. Gavels echoed. The dance began. My sister's husband wasted no time. He stood, voice booming. Your Honor, this so-called beneficiary cannot inherit. At the time, the trust was created. She was a minor under her parents' guardianship. They held legal control over her affairs. That guardianship extends to this day. And any property should revert to family management. He said the word family like it was a spell. My parents nodded vigorously. My sister sat back with a satisfied smirk, as though victory had already been signed. The judge tilted his head. Counsel, do you have supporting documentation? The husband opened his briefcase, pulling out worn papers, yellowed copies of guardianship forms from over 20 years ago. He spread them like a magician revealing cards. Here, Your Honor, irrefutable proof. For a moment, silence pressed against my ribs. Old memories rushed back, nights when those papers meant I belonged to no one but obligation. When my parents' signatures held more weight than my own existence. Then my lawyer rose, calm as ever. Your Honor, opposing counsel is correct. Those documents are real. But they are no longer valid. In fact, they were explicitly revoked. He reached into his binder and lifted a slim USB drive, placing it gently before the judge. The decedent recorded her revocation 1 week before passing. It is notarized and certified. The clerk connected the drive. The monitor flickered. And there she was again, my grandmother. Frail, but resolute. Blue cardigan, buttoned high. Voice unwavering. I revoke all prior guardianships, powers of attorney, and claims over Evelyn's affairs. She stands as my sole heir. Independent. Free of interference. My mother gasped. My sister shot forward in her seat, whispering harshly to her husband. My father clenched his jaw so tightly, I thought his teeth might break. This video, my lawyer continued, was witnessed by 2 individuals, notarized, and entered into record. Opposing counsel's documents are, in effect, obsolete. The judge nodded. Fingerstipel. Compelling. Do you have further evidence? Yes. Your Honor. My lawyer handed over a stack of bank records, neatly tabbed. In addition to affirming Evelyn's rights, the decedent flagged unusual withdrawals from her accounts. Here we show $260,000 siphoned in the year prior to her death. Signatures correspond to family members seated here. The courtroom shifted. A collective intake of breath. My brother sank lower in his chair. My sister's face flushed scarlet. Her husband stammering. Those were family expenses. Authorized. Authorized by whom, the judge asked. Voice sharp. The husband faltered. By mutual agreement. Not by the account holder. My lawyer interjected smoothly. The transfers were contested by her. And she left records confirming as much. The judge leaned back. Eyes sweeping across my family. These are serious allegations. Fraud? Misappropriation. Potential elder exploitation. I will be ordering a preliminary investigation. My father shot to his feet. This is a farce. We raised that girl. We sacrificed. Sit down. Sire. The judge barked. The gavel struck once. The sound crisp as a whip. My father collapsed back into his chair. Muttering curses. My sister turned on me then. Her voice sharp enough to cut. This isn't your home. You're just squatting on pity. She took you in because she felt sorry for you. Her words echoed. Bouncing off walls meant for truth. Every pair of eyes in the room fixed on me. I stood. My knees wanted to shake. But I locked them still. She took me in because you abandoned me. And she gave me more than walls and windows. She gave me dignity. And you want to strip even that away. For a moment. Silence again. Then the judge cleared his throat. Enough. We are not here for family feuds but for law. The evidence favors the beneficiary. Until the investigation concludes. All property remains under her control. Control. The word rang in my ears like church bells. My sister hissed. This isn't finished. I leaned closer. Speaking low so only she could hear. No. It's only just begun. As we filed out of the courtroom. Reporters loitered in the hall. Tipped off by someone likely, my sister. Cameras flashed. Questions flew. I said nothing. But I knew the story was already gathering speed. The public loves a tale of inheritance and betrayal. And soon. The truth would not only be in court records, it would be everywhere. But what they didn't know was that I had more than papers and videos. I had a plan that would expose them. Not just legally. But publicly. For the frauds they were. The story did not stay in the courthouse. It never does. By the next morning. A headline ran on a local financial blog, Heiress Defends Inheritance Against Family Challenge. By noon. It spread to national outlets. With sharper edges, Penthouse battle exposes alleged family fraud. My phone lit up with notifications I didn't ask for. The city loves a scandal. Especially one that involves blood and money. I hadn't planned to speak. But silence is a kind of surrender. That afternoon. I sat with a journalist. From a major financial paper. She asked questions with steady eyes. Her recorder blinking red between us. I answered plainly. My grandmother raised me when no one else would. She taught me to work. To save. To value truth above appearances. The trust was her final act of love. All I am doing is honoring it. The article ran with my words intact. Within hours. People on social media repeated them. Clipping and sharing them with outrage. A video of my sister's outburst in court. This isn't your home. You're just squatting. On pity, circulated online. A 30-second clip that burned hotter than a torch. Viewers dissected her tone. Her smugness. Her entitlement. Hashtag spread. My inbox filled with strangers writing. Stay strong. Families like that don't deserve you. Then came the real blow. The video of my grandmother. Recorded in her cardigan. Her voice calm as stone. Leaked. Not by me. But by someone in the courthouse. Within 24 hours. It had been viewed millions of times. People wept in comment sections. This woman speaks with such clarity. One wrote. Her family should be ashamed. For once. The crowd was on my side. And I decided to use that tide. I called a press conference in the gallery. I managed downtown. Cameras lined the walls where paintings once hung. Reporters leaned forward as I spoke into the microphone. They wanted to paint me as ungrateful, as someone stealing from her own blood. But the truth is simple, I was the child left behind. And now I am the adult they cannot erase. This trust, this home, this legacy, these are not trophies. They are testimony. And today, I will honor them by ensuring no one profits from fraud. Then I held up the bank records. I didn't reveal every detail. Just enough to prove the investigation was real. Transfers. Names. Dates. The room buzzed. Cameras snapped like insects. I saw my sister's husband's career unravel in that moment. He had represented himself as a man of law. But the documents told another story, that he had authorized withdrawals never meant to leave the account. The next day, the Bar Association suspended his license, pending review. He tried to spin it as political. But the truth had teeth. And it was already biting. My father refused to appear on camera, retreating into silence. My mother gave one interview, crying about betrayal. But the clip backfired. Audiences saw crocodile tears. My brother posted cryptic messages online, vague threats about family loyalty. But they only fueled the fire. Meanwhile, I held steady. I released a statement at an investment conference, standing beneath bright lights. They once called me nothing. I said, words measured, deliberate. Now they beg me for mercy. But this is not about mercy. It is about justice. The crowd erupted in applause. The clip spread. Strangers in airports recognized me, telling me to keep fighting. For the first time in years, I felt less like a ghost in my own bloodline and more like a person standing in full daylight. Still, revenge is never complete in silence. It requires a stage. And I gave them one. I organized an exhibit in my gallery, photographs of my grandmother's life. Documents preserved behind glass. Even the original deed to the penthouse. Framed. Visitors filed through. Reading. Weeping. Whispering. At the end of the exhibit, I placed one last piece, a placard that read, "Truth is the only inheritance worth keeping." The backlash against my family grew. My sister lost her job after her employer decided her public behavior clashed with company values. My brother found his name in articles about misappropriation. Every job prospect closing before it opened. And my parents, once pillars of neighborhood respect, became whispers in grocery aisles. They came to me eventually. Humbled. Or pretending to be. They sat in my penthouse living room. Eyes lowered. My father spoke first. Voice softer than I had ever heard it. "We didn't think it would go this far." "It always goes this far," I said. "When you build on lies, collapse is inevitable." My sister's hands trembled. "We were disparity. We thought. You thought wrong." I cut in. "And now you will answer to more than me. You will answer to the law. To the public you tried to fool. And to yourselves. When the lights are off and the house is quiet." They pleaded for compromise. I listened. But my silence was answer enough. Because revenge, real revenge, is not shouting or striking. It is letting truth stand tall while their own lies eat them alive. I used to think revenge would feel like fireworks, loud, blazing, impossible to ignore. But standing on the balcony of the penthouse, the city stretched below me in quiet glitter, I realized it was something else. Revenge was silence. It was the absence of their voices in my home. The absence of their hands in my pockets. The absence of their shadows over my choices. The investigations dragged on for months. Banks combed through transactions. The Bar Association questioned my sister's husband. And auditors uncovered trails of debt disguised as family expenses. Every letter of the law moved slower than anger. But it moved with weight. By the end of that year, my sister's husband lost his license. My father faced civil suits over fraudulent signatures. My mother, who had played the role of sorrowful bystander, was forced to pay back thousands she had withdrawn in emergency checks. My brother disappeared into another state, working odd jobs under different names. Once, I saw his face in a grainy news clip, an eviction protest in Detroit. I didn't reach out. Some bonds fray until they can't be rewoven. But my life, the one they told me would collapse without their approval, only grew. The gallery expanded, hosting new artists who, like me, had been told they were not enough. I started a fund in my grandmother's name. Not just for art, but for children abandoned in the system, children like I once was. Invisible, until someone finally looked. People asked if I ever forgave my family. I told them forgiveness was the wrong word. You don't forgive a storm for flooding your house. You rebuild. Stronger. Smarter. With walls they can't break. The penthouse became more than a home. It became a promise fulfilled. Each room carried her touch the way she loved heavy curtains. The books she read until the spines cracked. The small rug she mended by hand. When I walked across the polished floor, I felt her steps there too. And when the sun poured through the glass in the late afternoon, I remembered her words, good documents have weight. The way promises have weight. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear my sisters shout, "This isn't your home," echoing. I smile now when I hear it. Because I know the truth. This is my home. Earned. Defended. And protected. The city doesn't care much about one family's downfall. Scandals come and go, replaced by fresher chaos. But for me, the ending was not a headline. It was waking each morning in a place they could no longer touch. It was sipping coffee on the balcony while the skyline yawned awake. It was choosing peace. Not because they allowed it, but because I built it. I think of her often, my grandmother. In her blue cardigan. Speaking into the camera with a steady voice. She gave me the shield. She gave me the sword. She gave me herself. And with that, she gave me the freedom to stand. Not as their abandoned child, but as my own person. To anyone listening, I'll leave you with this: family is not blood alone. Family is who shows up when the house is dark. Who keeps the light kind. Who remembers you when others forget. If you believe I made the right choice, comment right. If you think there was a better way, share your idea. And remember, truth is the only inheritance worth keeping. Story 2. James is my name. I'm 36 years old. And I would have laughed it off 5 years ago if you had told me that a single family cookout would completely alter my life. However, occasionally, the most little comment which most others assume is only a joke cuts so deeply that it completely changes your perception of who you are. Your spouse and others in your immediate vicinity. For me, it was when my wife's brother scoffed at me in front of the entire family while leaning over the picnic table and said, "If you disappear tomorrow, nobody will even notice." Like that was the funniest line they had ever heard. Everyone burst out laughing. Everybody but me. I grinned, lifted my glass, and gave a 2-word response. Let's see. That evening, as my mind continued to reverberate with laughter, I gathered my belongings and vanished. But in order to comprehend that night, let me go back a bit. You must comprehend the lead-up. My wife came from a troubled family. No overt cruelty was displayed by them. Not the kind that fling plates across the room or yell at one another in public. They were more subdued in their poison, with subtle jabs disguised as comedy. Tradition cloaked partiality. And a strong feeling that I was constantly on the outside. Despite my best efforts to blend in. My wife Claire was from a family that valued looks. Her parents' residence was nearly a need for Sunday dinners. Everybody had to attend the yearly barbecue. And holidays were viewed more as performances to be evaluated than as special occasions to treasure. All of this I knew before entering. However, you persuade yourself it's not so horrible when you're in love. You learn to chuckle when people roll their eyes at your interests. Grin when they make fun of your professional choices. And ignore the remarks. I went along for years. When you married into a family that wasn't sure how to react to you, I assumed that's what you did. About 2 years into our marriage, I became aware that I was disposable for the first time. Her family never forgot that I had lost my job during a wave of firm layoffs. Even though I soon found part-time employment to keep things afloat. Even though I too had a degree. Her mother commented at one meal that at least Claire had one to fall back on. You'll figure it out eventually, James, her father said. As if I were a youngster who was still unsure of his life's purpose. Claire maintained that they were only attempting to uplift me. However, encouragement often doesn't sound like a pat on the head and a reminder of your insignificance. I dismissed it, thinking myself, it will pass. that when I got back on my feet, everything would change. And I did. I gathered enough money for Claire and me to make a down payment on a small property after working hard and landing a steady job. However, nothing I did was sufficient to change their perception of me as the fortunate man who married their daughter. That summer's BBQ was meant to be a festivity. The birthday of her father. With children playing with sparklers. Everyone congregated in the backyard, smoking and enjoying the barbecue. I recall carrying a dish of food that I wasn't very hungry for, when the talk veered toward subtle digs, as it frequently did. The ringleader was Matt, Claire's brother. He was the type of man who wore his conceit like a perfume. It smelled so good before he even opened his mouth. His financial situation had improved. Or so he wanted everyone to believe. His tales were consistently a bit too well written. His accomplishments usually came at the ideal moment to eclipse everyone else's work. That evening, after I had mentioned that the ribs were better than they had been the year before, Matt leaned back, grinned, and remarked, "If James disappeared tomorrow, nobody would even notice." The words themselves weren't the hardest part. It was the way the others all started laughing. Claire, too. Perhaps she didn't mean what it sounded like. Perhaps she interpreted it as familial humor. However, at that very moment, it seemed to validate every suspicion I had harbored for years. I wasn't related. I had finally had enough of being a joke line in their screenplay and a prop in their show. I didn't leave all at once. I didn't cause any trouble. "We'll see," I responded, grinning and lifting my cup as if to toast. They thought I was playing along, so they laughed harder. However, once the party finished and the sun set, I silently packed a duffel bag, went home, and left. Not a word. No farewell. Nothing but quiet. The problem with vanishing is that it can be both freeing and scary. It's terrifying because it makes you realize how much of who you are depends on other people knowing you. Freeing, because you can choose who you are without their opinions dictating to you, once you take a step back. That night, I had no idea what the future held. But I did know one thing. The man who stood there and took it was no longer who I was going to be. And the narrative truly starts there. Since leaving was just the beginning. Then everything they believed they knew about me and everything I believed I knew about them began to slowly and purposefully fall apart. That was the spark. Though, during the cookout that evening, the day I determined I could stand no more being invisible, I made the decision to show them what life was like without me if they so desired. Looking back, I see that the BBQ wasn't a single act of brutality. It was only the loudest manifestation of a long simmering pattern. James is my name. I'm 36. And even though I've always thought of myself as patient, even laid back, there's a limit to how many times someone can be laughed at, pushed aside, or discarded until something inside of you breaks. Although the tension had been gradually increasing before the cookout, it was the final straw. Every family get-together. Casual comment. Every instance when Claire's relatives made it apparent that I wasn't truly one of them. Brick by brick, the first fractures appeared around the holidays. At her parents' place, Thanksgiving seemed like a well-planned show. Everyone would be seated, according to their assigned seats, by her mother. With myself, Claire opposite from her father, Matt to his right, and her father at the head of the table, next to the relative who didn't bring a date that year. Always down near the end. It may seem little, but the message was clear. I wasn't the center, I was the periphery. They weren't important enough to sit near, to join in on the stories and laughs that went around the top of the table. Claire told me I was dreaming when I mentioned it to her once. Half jokingly, she said, "It's just the way Mom does it." However, I was aware. People make space for the people they care about. The others were pushed away. But it wasn't just the seats. While Matt's were seen as golden achievements, every achievement of mine was downplayed or disregarded. Claire's father shrugged and murmured, "That's good." When I was promoted at work, not like Matt's new investment company. Though, naturally, her mother remarked when I had paid off the used automobile I had been driving for years. Last month, Matt purchased a brand new SUV. It was made quite apparent that they spotted one. But I wasn't competing with him, whether I went inside. and I was always a far-off second in their eyes. I recall how painful it was to smile nicely and conceal my resentment, while everyone else gave Matt the pat on the back as if he were some victorious hero. There were the favors after that. When Matt needed assistance moving into his new condo, everyone else viewed his requests as duties because he could do no wrong. Everybody's schedules were cleared. When I contacted Claire's father for help repairing our fence, he suggested that I could get a professional. James, everyone will avoid the hassle. Even though it was only a single statement. The manner he delivered it made me seem incompetent. As if the effort wasn't worth my requirements. Went deep. When I attempted to join in on their chats, they all adopted the same tone. When I had a suggestion or an opinion, they responded with the same contemptuous nod as if I weren't actually there. As if I could disappear. And nobody would notice. As Matt finally remarked aloud, Claire was the victim of even more deception. Her family was always able to tune her into their frequency by manipulating her emotions like a radio dial. When I proposed that we forego one of the incessant family meals in order to spend a peaceful weekend alone, Claire's mother would give her a call. In her lovely, remorseful voice, she would remark, "Oh, we were so looking forward to seeing you. Without you, it simply wouldn't seem right." The connotation was obvious. Claire would be disappointing them if we skipped even one supper. And I would be at fault if Claire failed them. Week after week. Holiday after holiday. We continued. Since saying no would make Claire feel like she was betraying them, I had to play along as the outsider. One Christmas dinner in particular still sticks in my memory. I was worn out and on fumes from working late shifts all week. But I didn't want to ruin Claire's getaway. I saw that her mother had used elegant name cards to arrange the dishes when we seated at her parents' dining table. Each person's was meticulously written in gold ink. Everybody but me. A simple dish took my place. No ornamentation. No card. I inquired politely whether mine had been misplaced. Matt spoke up. They must have run out of names to write. There was laughing around the table. Claire even laughed. Yet she touched my hand as if it would ease the pain. I also laughed. Or feigned it. Anyhow. But I was burning within. The card wasn't the point. It has to do with what it stood for. That their tale would never include me as more than a footnote. Regardless of how hard I worked. I persuaded myself that if I simply kept my head down, I could manage it. However, the fact is that every time somebody interrupted me during a discussion or brought up Matt's awesomeness, I was reminded of how terrific he was. They were erecting a wall between me and them. And this was just another brick. I made several attempts to discuss it with Claire. But she consistently played it down. She would respond, "That's simply the way they are." Or worse. "Keep it in perspective. It's overly sensitive of you." Perhaps she was correct. Perhaps I was too sensitive. However, being sensitive does not lessen the pain of the cut. It sharpens it. The worst part occurred before to the cookout. Claire and I had thrown a little supper at our place only a few weeks before. Something easy. Only wine and pasta. To commemorate the 3rd anniversary of our marriage. In the hopes of a more private, peaceful evening, we had invited Matt and her parents. I went into the kitchen to replenish the wine halfway through supper. I also heard her mother talking to Claire in a whisper. "You could have done so much better. Honey." According to Matt, his coworker David is still unmarried. You do recall David, a respectable family with a handsome stable. Thinking on your future is something you can do at any time. Even though Claire dismissed her and said that she was content, the comments nonetheless struck a chord with me. The fact that it was not intended for me to hear it made no difference. All of it validated my long-held fears. They weren't simply against me. They didn't believe I had any right to be there. Because of this, Matt's remark about varnish at the cookout was more hurtful than necessary. It was more than a mean joke. It was the result of my own marriage, where I had been treated like a shadow for years. When they left, I was a visitor in a family that I should have been a part of. Every meal, every holiday, and every instance of being ignored flashed before my eyes. And I realized right away that their laughter wasn't innocuous. It reflected their actual perception of me. Interchangeable. Invisible. Throwaway. I was drinking my duffel bag at home that evening, while they were still mentally reciting Matt's joke like a clever punchline. I had trembling hands. Not out of fear, but rather from the rush of finally resolving to stop letting them define who I am. I was not fleeing. I was emerging from behind them. Even though I had no idea what the future held, I was certain that my absence would be more noticeable than anything I could have said. And that's when the tension really started to build. People notice things they never thought they'd lose once you're gone. The worst part, in my opinion, was the barbecue. I foolishly believed that the years of minor setbacks, silent rejections, and incessant comparisons had already reached their climax. However, I was mistaken. The fact is that when you're among individuals who like undermining others, there's always a deeper wound waiting to be discovered. James is my name. I am 36 years old, and truly betrayed. The type that made me understand there was no turning back and hollowed me out. Didn't show up for a Christmas get-together or supper. Like most betrayals, it happened in silence, appearing in my life without warning. 2 weeks or so had passed since the barbecue, since I attempted to bring it up to express how deeply Matt's remarks had stung. Claire and I had seldom discussed it. With a sigh, she waved it away. It was a joke. James, you're thinking too much about this. You can't continue to take things personally. I wanted to yell that it wasn't a joke. To dispute. Years passed during which I was the target of jokes. However, I held my tongue. There was a part of me that hoped she would finally see it my way. A other part of her knew she wouldn't. I stayed. Nevertheless, I wasn't prepared for the harshness of her relatives to ruin my marriage. Not quite yet. The treachery followed. One evening, while taking a shower, Claire had left her phone on the kitchen counter. I wasn't spying. I didn't plan on searching. However, the preview stopped me cold as a fresh message appeared on the screen. Her mother gave it to her. Don't allow James to bring you down. You deserve to be uplifted by someone. Against my better judgment. My chest constricted. I clicked on the thread. I discovered more than one message. They were there for months. Behind my back. I received messages from her father, mother, and even Matt. All of whom were gently teasing me. James will never be as helpful as Matt. Playing house with someone who can't keep up isn't something you want to spend your finest years. Imagine what your life would have been like if you were married to an ambitious person. Claire's answers were the worst. She didn't stand up for me. She did not order them to halt. She did not stop them from criticizing each other all the time. Rather, she responded with evasive justifications. He's making an effort. He has good intentions. He'll work things out in due time. She wasn't by my side. She was putting up with me. More than anything her relatives had ever said. That knowledge hurt because it implied that she could have secretly believed them. I recall feeling as though the floor had collapsed beneath me as I sat at the table and gazed at her phone. Her relatives made fun of me. But that wasn't all. Claire was the one who led them. She gave them permission to sow suspicion about me. And perhaps those doubts had been growing for years. She was stuck in the between. I had told myself, and she had no idea how to confront them. But now I realized the reality. She was out of the center. Quietly. She leaned over their side. I tested it the following morning. I jokingly asked, "Do you ever regret marrying me during breakfast?" She gave me a surprised glance, before quietly laughing as if I had said something dumb. Obviously not. Why would you ask that? I digested it, instead of pushing to hurl her own words from the texts in her face. I grinned, nodded, and told her that I was simply exhausted and overanalyzing the situation. However, something inside of me changed the trust that had bound me to her, which was already brittle and completely broken. A few days later, at another family meal, the last straw was delivered. Claire insisted that it was her father's retirement celebration. Even though I didn't want to go. He finds it very meaningful, she added. I thus concurred. I put on a nice grin, dressed nicely, and entered their house with my guard up. At first, everything went nicely. But every time Matt opened his lips, I could sense the typical undercurrent of anxiety. Then, as supper was coming to a conclusion, Claire's father got up to toast them. He lifted his glass, glanced around the table, and started to express gratitude to everyone for their years of support. He addressed a cousin's charity work, lauded his daughter-in-law's employment, commended Matt for his business, and identified each of his children. Then, for a little moment, His eyes came to mine. I foolishly believed that perhaps he would show me some modest gesture of goodwill. Rather, he said with a laugh. Naturally. We appreciate James's demonstration of Claire's generosity. There was a shout of laughing around the table. My glass became chilly in my hands. When I understood that what he had just done had reduced me to charity, I felt the blood drain from my cheeks. Nor a partner. Nor a spouse. Claire was generous enough to bear the weight. I waited for her to say anything. To defend me. To inform her father. While I stared at her. It was unkind. However, she didn't. With a feeble smile, she took a drink of her wine. The treachery was that. Not only the words, but also the quiet that ensued. The lady who was meant to support me remained silent. I realized then that something inside of me was irreparably damaged. I didn't display it. Clink glasses played the role as I chuckled along. But I was already packed my things inside. This time, it's everything. Not just clothing. My value. My dignity. And what strength I still had. Because there is nothing left to cling to when faith is lost. And then giggling becomes a weapon. Stepping out of range is the only way to live. I stayed awake that night as Claire slept next to me. Gazing at the ceiling and again repeating what her father had said. Evidence of Claire's generosity. Evidence that I was nothing more than the joke they all secretly thought I was. That's when the idea initially germinated. And I wouldn't be the forgotten one if I really vanished. They would. Fireworks aren't used to signal rock bottom. It enters covertly, disguising itself as fatigue, numbness, and a heavy stillness that makes it impossible to recall the sound of your own voice. James is my name. I'm 36 years old. And I hardly recognized myself after that retirement celebration. I gave up debating. I ceased to explain and to anticipate. Playing the part they had written for me was simpler than continuing to struggle and demonstrate that I was worthy of a different one. The hardest times were in the mornings. I used to wonder whether Claire looked at me the same way her parents did when I woke up next her. I recalled the dull defenses she had provided as they broke me down. As well as the texts I had seen on her phone. Did she view me as a duty or as a man she loved? Every time she smiled at me, she had to explain herself. All casualties. I cherish you. I looked for cracks in it. Was it habitual or genuine? I had lost my trust. And without it, uncertainty weighed heavily on even the most commonplace motions. I poured myself into lengthy hours at work. I was in the office because I didn't have to be at home. Not because I love my work. Dinners where Claire told me about her day and I silently nodded. Acting as though I wasn't hollowed out on the inside. Weren't something I had to endure. My colleagues began to notice. One of them, Sam, a buddy, inquired about my well-being. He once said, "You look like you're carrying one. 000 pounds. I dismissed it. How could I explain that it wasn't simply stress or job that was weighing me down? It was the gradual deterioration of my identity. It began to seem like the house wasn't mine either. Claire would invite her relatives around without asking me how she let Matt to enter the house as if he owned it. And I saw this. When I got home from errands one Saturday, I discovered Matt searching through my tools in my garage. He smirked and didn't even glance up when Claire remarked, "I could borrow a few things." He waved me away when I explained that I required the equipment for a project. New ones are available for purchase. In any case, you're likely to make a mistake. He took half of my set with him. Later, Claire advised me not to worry too much about it. He will return them. He didn't, she said. She also didn't inquire. The house stopped feeling like a home at that point. I no longer belonged there. It was merely a space with walls and a roof where I slept. I began staying late at work and occasionally dozing off at my desk. Explaining to my boss that I was exhausted, and to my wife that I was invisible, was simpler. A voice in the back of my mind started the silent planning. It started off as just thoughts. What if I traveled alone for a weekend? What would happen if I stopped attending family dinners? What if I simply walked out? But as you feed them, whispers get louder. I began experimenting with the concept of absence. Refusing to answer the phone when Claire's mother called and skipping supper on the pretext of working overtime. I stayed at work so late that when I arrived home, Claire was already asleep. No one paid much attention. No one inquired about my whereabouts. And I discovered an odd clarity in that carelessness. They had already demonstrated to me what life was like in my absence. One evening, I listened to Claire on the phone in the kitchen as I sat in the living room with the lights off. She was conversing with her mom. "He's fine," she remarked in a preoccupied tone, as if she were describing the weather. "James has simply been silent recently. I believe he's worn out." The faint sound of her mother's voice echoed through the walls. "Well, perhaps he will change his mind. Or perhaps he won't. You're capable of handling either situation." Claire chuckled quietly. Not precisely in agreement, but also not in protest. No one, not even my wife, was scared of losing me. I realized as I sat there in the dark. My chest tight. Rock bottom struck at that point. There was no crash. Like quicksand. It dragged me deeper every day until I could hardly see the sky above. However, there was a spark even at the bottom. A whispering voice inside of me. Make them feel your absence if they don't already. So I started making plans in secret. With caution, I began putting money into an account with every paycheck. Claire was unaware of it. I started searching for rentals in places that were far enough away for me to blend in with the background. I simplified my life, retaining just the things I knew I could carry and selling the rest. Each stride was little, purposeful, and out of sight. And I felt a tiny bit of control return with every motion. The spark had been ignited on the night of the BBQ. However, the fire started at this point. That's when I started getting ready to disappear on my own terms and ceased pleading to be noticed. Alongside a woman who was unaware of my quiet. I lay awake at night, gazing at the ceiling. I committed to myself. In case they believed I was invisible, they had yet to see anything. It's interesting that when you hit rock bottom, the ground beneath you becomes evident. Each step seems like ascending because there is nothing left to fall through. James is my name. At the age of 36, I finally began to ascend after months of being the target of jokes. The charity case. And the man who would never be missed. Not too loudly. Not with a big splash. But in private. Like a flood that sweeps in while no one is looking. The money was the first thing. I had been diverting a portion of every paycheck into a personal account for weeks. Over time, it developed into something big. But initially, it was only a trickle that was almost perceptible. I had not felt in control in years until I watched the balance increase. There was more to the account than figures. It was liberty. Independence from Claire's parents. I hear voices in my brain. Liberation from Matt. Grin. Freedom as an afterthought from the dining tables I sat at. Each dollar represented a block. In the cornerstone of my private life that I was constructing. My health came in second. I was exhausted and lethargic after years of stress. The sort of man who, rather than moving with purpose, dragged himself through the day. However, I made the decision to organize my escape. Something changed. I joined a gym close to where I work. Not one of those upscale establishments. It was a plain, unadorned place where people came to perspire and go. Something Claire's family would laugh at. I initially found it difficult to stay on the treadmill for more than 20 minutes. But I persisted. I gradually started to see improvements as I developed routines and added weights day after day. I straightened my shoulder. I felt energized again. I no longer saw the weary, unappreciated spouse when I glanced in the mirror. Someone sharper. I noticed. More powerful. Once more. Someone with a gleam in his eyes. Work turned into a place where I flourished. Rather than spending a lot of time away from home, I began focusing my energies on making real improvement. I took on tasks that no one else was interested in. Stayed up late. Not with hopelessness, but with resolve. Promotions had always seemed to be saved for others. My employer remarked. They type like Matt. However, all of a sudden, I was being requested to attend meetings and share my thoughts. Assigned important responsibility. At home, I didn't boast about it. I took my time telling Claire's folks that this belonged to me. My triumphs untarnished by their contemptuous giggling. And then came the network. Sam, my coworker, who had once told me I looked like I was carrying the world on my shoulders, became an unexpected ally. He introduced me to friends of his people outside my bubble. People who didn't know me as Claire's husband or Matt's brother-in-law. They knew me as James. We grabbed drinks. We talked about life. We laughed without anyone turning me into the punchline. For the first time in years, I felt seen. Truly seen. Claire noticed something was different, though she couldn't put her finger on it. One night, she asked, "You've been distant lately. Is everything okay?" I smiled, kissed her on the cheek and said, "Just busy with work." And that was true. But not in the way she thought. I wasn't distant because I was slipping away. I was distant because I was building something new. Something she and her family weren't part of. The more I grew, the less I needed their approval. And the less I needed their approval, the clearer my future became. The turning point of my rise came unexpected. I was at a small networking event. Sam had dragged me to half, convinced I wouldn't fit in. But as I stood there talking to people who knew nothing about my family, nothing about Claire, I realized I was thriving. I spoke with confidence. People laughed at my jokes. Not at me, but with me. One man even pulled me aside and said, "You've got a good head on your shoulders. Ever think about starting something on your own?" The idea lit a fire in me. For years, I had been told I was second-rate, incapable, and someone who would mess things up if given the chance. And here was a stranger who saw potential. That night, as I drove home, I gripped the steering wheel tighter and whispered to myself, "They were wrong about you. They've always been wrong." Back at home, the family dinners continued. I still attended, still played the quiet role. But now it was different. I wasn't crushed under their words anymore. When Matt bragged about his new SUV, I nodded, smiled, and thought about the gym session I crushed that morning when Claire's father made a veiled jab about ambition. I smiled politely, knowing that at work, my name was being mentioned in rooms Matt could never enter. When her mother sighed about what Claire could have had, I kept my face neutral, my eyes calm, because deep inside I knew I was no longer chained to their table. I was building something stronger than their approval. And I didn't need their laughter to validate me anymore. In fact, their laughter was becoming background noise. A soundtrack to my quiet transformation. The rise wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a single moment of triumph. It was steady, like climbing a staircase in the dark, one step at a time, until suddenly you realize you're standing taller, breathing easier, looking down on the people who once loomed above you. And as the weeks went by, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I wasn't just planning to leave. I was preparing to return stronger than they ever imagined. And when I did, the people who once told me I wouldn't be noticed would learn just how wrong they had been. The rise gave me strength, but the setup gave me purpose. My name is James. I'm 36, and by the time I had rebuilt myself financially, physically and emotionally, I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was plotting. It wasn't revenge for the sake of cruelty. It was justice. It was balance. It was finally putting the weight of my absence where it belonged. On the shoulders of those who swore they'd never feel it. The first shift came through work. My steady climb hadn't gone unnoticed. And when a senior manager announced he was retiring, I was offered the chance to step into a role that would have seemed unimaginable just a year before. More pay. More authority. More freedom. The irony wasn't lost on me. While Claire's father and brother laughed about my lack of ambition, I had quietly climbed higher than either of them knew. But I didn't brag. I didn't post about it. I let my silence do the heavy lifting. The less they knew, the more powerful I became. With the promotion came connections. I wasn't just sitting in my office anymore. I was meeting with clients, with other managers, with people who operated in circles far removed from the suffocating bubble of Claire's family. These were people who valued results, not appearances. People who didn't care about last names or who your father was. For the first time in my adult life, I realized how small Claire's family really was in their world. Matt was king, but outside it, he was no one. And I quiet. Overlooked. James was becoming someone. I also tightened my financial net. That secret account I'd been feeding grew to the point where I could live comfortably without Claire or her family's knowledge. I spoke with an advisor, set up investments, and even looked into property in another town. I started spending weekends driving out to nearby cities for work. I told Claire, but really I was scouting. I found a small apartment in a quiet neighborhood. Nothing flashy, but it was mine. I signed the lease under a name variation. My middle name first. Last name, second. So it wouldn't be obvious if anyone searched. It became my safe house. My fortress. The place I could slip into when the time was right. But the most important setup wasn't financial or professional. It was personal. During one of my trips, I reconnected with an old college friend. Daniel. We hadn't spoken in years. But when I told him vaguely that I was looking for a change, he listened without judgment. Daniel had built a consulting business and, as it turned out, had connections that overlapped with Matt's industry. Funny thing. He told me one night over drinks. Your brother-in-law has a reputation for flashy, reckless people. Don't take him as seriously as he thinks. That stuck with me for years. Matt had lauded his supposed success over me. But to people outside his family, he was already a joke. Daniel even hinted at projects Matt had botched, deals that had gone sideways. All hidden beneath his carefully polished image. That was when the idea crystallized. My revenge didn't need to be loud. I didn't need to scream or confront or demand acknowledgement. All I had to do was vanish cleanly. Completely. And let the cracks in their world widen without me there to absorb their cruelty. And when they inevitably looked for me, when they tried to drag me back into their orbit, they would find only silence and silence. When you're used to mocking someone is deafening. At home, I kept playing my part. I still attended dinners. Still nodded at the jokes. Still let Matt strut. And her parents condescend. But inside, I was already gone. Every smile was rehearsed. Every thank you was hollow. They didn't know it. But they were laughing at a ghost. The setup also had another layer. One they couldn't see. I began documenting quietly. Discreetly. I collected evidence of their words. Their treatment of me. Even the text messages I had found on Claire's phone. I wasn't planning to use them right away. But I knew someday I might need proof. Proof that I hadn't. Just imagine the years of humiliation. Proof that the jokes and concerns were daggers dressed as kindness. And if the day came when I had to defend my choices, those receipts would speak louder than anything I could say. The more I prepared, the calmer I felt. The anger that once burned in me had cooled into something sharper. Resolve. I wasn't the same man they mocked at the barbecue. I was stronger. Smarter. Untethered from their approval. And while they continued to laugh in their small, insular world, I was stepping into something larger. Something they couldn't touch. One evening, sitting alone in my apartment, I stared at the bare walls and whispered to myself, they think you're invisible. Show them what invisible really means. And that's when I knew the setup was complete. The stage was ready. All that remained was the execution. Revenge isn't always fire and thunder. Sometimes it's the quiet. A storm. The kind you don't see forming until it's already washed everything away. My name is James. I'm 36. And by the time the stage was set, I didn't need to scream or confront anyone. All I had to do was disappear in the right way, at the right time. Leaving behind just enough silence for their own words and actions to echo louder than anything I could say. The execution began the night of another family gathering. Labor Day weekend. A big barbecue at Claire's parents' house. I remember walking into that backyard and realizing I was already gone. Matt was holding court as usual. Bragging about a deal he closed. Her parents were fussing over the grill. Claire was smiling. That practice smile she wore around them. No one noticed that I wasn't really there. Not emotionally. Not mentally. I was standing in the middle of their world and already outside it. I played along. Of course. I laughed when I was supposed to. Nodded when Matt smirked. Held Claire's hand when she squeezed mine. But inside, I was counting down the minutes. I knew this would be the last time I'd stand among them. Like this. The last time I played the role they had written for me. When her father made another joke at my expense. James is proof. Claire inherited my passions. I smiled politely and raised my glass. You're right. I said calmly. Patience pays off. They laughed. None the wiser. That night, when Claire went to bed, I slipped out of the house. Not with just a duffel bag this time. This time it was everything that mattered. The papers. The money. The keys to the apartment. I'd been quietly maintaining. I left my wedding ring on the dresser. Not in anger, but in clarity. A symbol of the role I had been forced into return to the stage. It belonged to. I didn't leave a note. I didn't slam the door. I didn't give them the satisfaction of drama. I simply vanished. The silence that followed was my revenge. Because silence, when you expect someone to absorb your cruelty, is devastating. The next day, the call started. Claire's name lit up my phone again and again. Then her mother. Then Matt. I didn't answer. Messages piled in. First confusion. Then annoyance. Then concern. Where are you? This isn't funny. You're acting childish. And finally, the words that tasted sweeter than any I had ever read. We need you to come back. But I didn't. I stayed away. I poured myself into my new life. My job. My health. My friendships outside their orbit. And while I thrived in silence, they began to unravel through Daniel. My old friend with connections in Matt's industry. I heard whispers. Deals falling apart. Investors pulling out Matt's empire wasn't as solid as he made it seem. And without me around to play the fool, to absorb the spotlight of mockery, the cracks in his image were harder to hide. Claire, too, began to falter. She reached out with long, pleading emails. We can fix this. They didn't mean it. Come home. James. Please. But the words rang hollow because I had seen her silence at that retirement dinner. I had read her lukewarm defenses in those messages. She hadn't stood by me when it mattered. Now she was standing alone. Realized too late that I had been the anchor she assumed would always be there. The most satisfying part wasn't their unraveling, though. It was the realization that I no longer needed their acknowledgement. My revenge wasn't in proving myself to them. It was in showing through absence that I had been the one holding more weight than they ever admitted. The family gatherings grew quieter without me. The laughter less sharp. The stories less grand. They had mocked me as invisible. But in my silence I had become the shadow. They couldn't escape. One evening, months later, I ran into an old acquaintance of Claire's parents at a grocery store in my new town. She didn't know I had left. Didn't know the details. But she smiled and said, "Funny thing. Your in-laws were at a dinner last week. They seemed smaller. Somehow quieter. Not their usual selves." I walked away from that conversation with a smile that didn't fade for hours. My revenge had worked without me to absorb their cruelty. They had nothing to sharpen themselves against. And the best part, they didn't even realize that I had planned it this way. To them, it looked like I'd simply cracked under the weight of their jokes and vanished. But the truth was sharper. I had built my exit piece by piece. Until the moment I walked out was as smooth as closing a door. The silence I left behind was louder than anything I could have shouted. But of course, revenge doesn't end with the exit. It's in what comes after. When the people who thought they'd never miss you begin to realize they already do. And that's where the fallout truly begins. Fallout isn't always explosive. Sometimes it's slow. Like watching a house rot from the foundation up. My name's James. I'm 36. And by the time my revenge settled into silence, the cracks in their world had widened into chasms they couldn't ignore. I didn't have to lift a finger. All I had to do was stay gone. At first, their messages had been frantic. "James. Where are you? This isn't like you. Come back. We can work through this." But weeks turned into months and I never replied. Claire's emails grew longer, tinged with desperation. She admitted things I never thought I'd hear her say, that she should have defended me. That she'd let her family's voices drown out her own. That she had taken me for granted. By the third month, she wasn't asking me to come home anymore. She was begging. Her family's tone shifted to the proud. Mocking voices became meek. Cautious. Her father wrote me once a short message. "We may have been too hard on you. I'd like to talk." That was the closest thing to an apology I would ever get. And it was almost laughable in its brevity. Matt, on the other hand, stayed true to form. His texts were half pleas, half threats. "You can't just run away. You think you're better than us. Grow up and come back." But behind the bravado, I knew he was unraveling. Through Daniel, I learned Matt's business had taken a serious hit. without the constant buffer of someone to overshadow and ridicule. People had started noticing his flaws. Investors who once tolerated his arrogance pulled away when they realized there was no solid foundation behind his charm. Deals fell apart. His reputation, so carefully polished in front of his family, crumbled in the eyes of those who mattered. Matt had always needed a foil. Someone to stand beneath him so he could look taller without me. He was just another arrogant man with nothing to back it up. Claire's parents suffered in their own way. They had built their social world on the illusion of a perfect family, the successful son, the strong daughter, the supportive in-laws. My absence became the crack they couldn't plaster over. People began asking questions. Where's James? We haven't seen him in a while. How's your daughter's husband doing? Each question was a reminder that I wasn't where they thought I should be. And they didn't have an answer for a family obsessed with appearances. That was worse than anything I could have said to them directly. As for Claire, she spiraled. The woman who once laughed along with her family's jokes, who once brushed off my pain as sensitivity, was suddenly left facing her own silence. I know because after nearly a year, she showed up at my apartment. She looked smaller. Somehow, her confidence deflated. She stood in the doorway, tears brimming in her eyes, and said, "I didn't realize until you were gone. You held us together. You held me together." I listened. I let her speak. Let her pour out her regrets, her apologies, her promises to change. And for a moment, I felt the old ache in my chest. The part of me that had once loved her, that had once wanted so badly to believe she'd stand by me. But then I remembered the laughter at the barbecue, the silence at the retirement dinner, the messages where she had said he's trying, instead of he's enough. So I told her the truth. Calmly. Quietly. Without anger. I don't hate you, Claire. But you believe them more than you believe me. And I can't come back to that. Her tears fell then. And she whispered, "I thought you'd always be there." I shook my head. "That's the thing, you all thought I'd always be there. And now you see what life looks like without me." She left that night. And for the first time in years I felt no guilt. Only peace in the months that followed. The calls dwindled. The emails slowed. Eventually, the silence wasn't just mine. It was theirs. Claire filed for divorce, citing Eric and syllable differences. I signed the papers without hesitation. Matt's business slipped further until even his parents couldn't ignore his failures. Their family gatherings became smaller, quieter, stripped of the sharp laughter that had once filled the air. They had laughed at me, told me I'd vanish without a trace. Instead, it was their laughter that vanished. Their certainty, their arrogance in me. I built a new life. A better one. One where I wasn't invisible. Where my worth wasn't measured by cruel jokes or comparisons to someone else. I found joy in friendships, fulfillment and work, strength in myself. The last time I saw any of them was by chance at a cafe in the city. Claire sat at a table with her parents and Matt. Their faces looked tired. Their voices muted. They didn't see me. But I saw them. And for a brief moment I almost felt sorry. Almost. But then I remembered that night at the barbecue. The words that had started it all. "If you vanish tomorrow, no one would even notice." I smiled to myself, turned and walked away. Because in the end, the truth was undeniable. I hadn't vanished. They had. And that was the final line of my story.